Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to today's video where we are unfortunately talking about the 10 worst books that I read this year. I say unfortunately because I personally don't love talking badly about books. I am a very firm believer that every book has an audience and the type of books that work for one person don't work for everybody, and that is a good thing. Everybody should be able to find what they love in books. And so normally when I give negative reviews about books, I still am trying to help them find their intended audience, and I recognize that it's just not me. And so the negative usually isn't that negative. I also don't like to dwell on like negative feelings and spread negativity, but I do know that this is a staple for many people at the end of the year. And there is a small part of me that does like looking back and realizing really what were the worst books I read this year, or the most disappointing, or the ones I would least strongly recommend to other people. And so if that also interests you, then definitely stay tuned for this video. But once again, I'm hoping personally that my negative reviews for these books can still be helpful and constructive. Maybe some of you watching know that you have pretty different reading tastes from me, so I hope that there's still a chance for me to say something about one of these books that you might still find intriguing and potentially find that you would enjoy one of these books. Or the other way that this will be helpful is if I can talk about these books in a way that if your tastes typically align with mine, you can be informed before picking up a book and potentially prevent yourself from picking up a book that you are not going to enjoy and not waste that time for yourself. So those are my goals with this video. It is not to just rant and bash on books. I do have 10 books to talk about today, and only one of them was 1 star from me. The rest were 2 stars. That's because I typically reserve 1-star ratings for books that I really wouldn't recommend to anybody. 2-star books are ones that really strongly did not work for me, but that I can see an element that still has merit and could work for somebody else. Also, because this year I did do a fair amount of DNFing. So if I recognized early on in a book that it just wasn't going to work for me and I didn't see it worthy of finishing, I just DNF'd it. So I don't rate those books. And while I might talk about DNFs in another video, I did not include any books that I DNF'd in this video. I don't think it's fair for me to call a book the worst book of the year if I didn't even finish it. So that's the preamble, all of the disclaimers. Without further ado, let's go ahead and just get into the top 10, or I guess I should say the bottom 10. So my 10th least favorite book of the year is Here One Moment by Liane Moriarty. This is a book that I just recently read, and it's a newer release with a premise that sounds like it should be completely up my alley. This book starts out with a group of characters who are all on the same flight, and on this flight, an older woman gets up, she starts walking down the aisle, and she looks at every single person she passes, and she predicts when they're going to die and what their cause of death is going to be. So of course, at the time that this is happening, each person has kind of a different reaction to it. Some people are laughing and just thinking she's crazy. Some people are getting really worried and anxious about the information she's sharing. And then after that happens, we follow kind of a group of characters, or a rotating set of perspectives, following their lives afterwards and playing out however many years they were predicted to have left to find out if her predictions were true or not. Again, this book should have really worked for me. It's very reminiscent of one of my favorite books of all time, The Measure by Nikki Erlich, which has a similar premise. But what I loved about that book was kind of the macro level discussions it had about how a situation like this affected the entire world. This book, Here One Moment, I really struggled because it was so character focused, and we were only looking at how this situation affected the select group of characters on the flight. So there was no greater conversation about how this would affect an entire society or world, or how government would have to get involved or anything like that. It was only about these specific characters, and I just didn't find them all that interesting. This book also focuses a lot on the older woman and what her life was like, what brought her to that moment, and a little bit more about whether her predictions can or can't be trusted. And I also didn't find her story all that interesting. I will say by the very end, the kind of conclusion to the book was more satisfying than I was expecting, but my enjoyment level of this book was just not there. I was very bored for the majority of reading this book. So that, along with just my expectations being really high and it not living up to them, is why I rated this book 2 stars. I can see why some people are enjoying it. It just did not work for me, and I was really disappointed about that. My number 9 worst book of this year is One of Our Kind by Nicola Yoon, another one that I was really happily anticipating. This is a contemporary book with a little bit of kind of a suspenseful undertone about this Black couple who decides to move their family to this Black only community. And once they get there, the husband starts acting a little bit weird and the wife starts thinking that something is strange about this community. It's not what she was expecting, but beyond that, she thinks there might be something more sinister at play. I was extremely excited for all of the commentary that I expected this book to give. And one of the kind of problems is that I'm not really sure what kind of tone and message this book was ultimately trying to have. Because it didn't totally work for me, I guess my impression is that it was supposed to be satire and a little bit more subtle in its themes and messaging, but it was so subtle that it was confusing. And even after reading a bunch of other reviews of this book, and especially written by BIPOC readers and reviewers, I just feel very weird about where this book went and what it was trying to say. I felt weird immediately after finishing it. I still feel weird many months later. So I just don't know what's going on here, and I'm not sure if I will pick up another book by this author. This is actually the second book that has not worked for me, and I'm really disappointed that it didn't live up to what I was hoping it would. Number 8 on this list is The Last Town by Blake Crouch. Blake Crouch is an author who I have absolutely loved all of his more recent works, which are science fiction books, but some of his more backlist titles are a little bit more dystopian, and this is book 3 in a dystopian series called The Pines, or Weyward Pines I think is the series name. The first book is called Pines, the second book is called Weyward, and this is the third book, The Last Town. Very briefly, the premise of the first book in this series, so as to not spoil the later books, is it's about this man who wakes up in this town in Idaho with his memory completely wiped. He doesn't remember who he is, he doesn't know what this town is that he's in, and he doesn't know why he's there. So it's all about him regaining his memories and learning about why he's in this mysterious town. And like I said, it is a little bit dystopian in nature. My enjoyment of this series just was a steady decline down. I enjoyed the first book, I gave it 4 stars. The second book, I think I gave 3 stars. And then this third book, I gave 2 stars. And it's mostly because these are all very short books, and I feel like they all just should have been combined into one. Cut some of the fluff, but then really get into the nitty-gritty of the series. I think the first one was the most intriguing. It left you with questions, but then in books 2 and 3, I just got very few answers to those questions. And like where this third book ended felt to me like where the first book should have ended, so that we could get more of that resolution throughout the rest of the series. So unfortunately, it was a huge disappointment. And if you are someone who read the first book in this series and liked it, I would encourage you not to finish it, which is a strange thing to recommend, but I thought the quality and again just the resolution and answers went down with every subsequent book. All right, number 7 on my list is Weyward by Amelia Hart. This book was outside of my comfort zone. This is a historical fiction book, but it has a pretty strong magical element to it, so kind of magical realism, and that is really not my thing normally, but I took a chance on this because it was one of the Book of the Month, Book of the Year finalists, so I did get a copy for free. And it follows 3 different women who are all basically 3 generations of the same family, and all of them have gone through a lot of hardships. And there's a lot of commentary in here about like women being accused of witchcraft and how some of that was completely unwarranted and really was based around men being insecure when women do things around healing and using medicine and things like that. But then it also overlapped with actual witchcraft, and it just did not work for me. None of that commentary worked for me. I also had an issue with the 3 different perspectives all being so limited. This book is pretty short, so I didn't feel like there was enough time to really get to know these characters and care about them and have enough time to see their stories through. So I didn't expect this one to work for me, and it didn't, so I was disappointed, but I should have known maybe before picking this one up that it wouldn't be for me, but it was a disappointment nonetheless. All right, number 6 on this list is The Mistletoe Mystery by Anita Prose. This is book number 2.5 in the Maid series, which is a kind of cozy mystery series set at a hotel, and that follows a maid that works at that hotel. I really enjoyed the first book. I also enjoyed the second book. This is a novella that takes place after that second book in the series, and unfortunately for me, it just felt very unnecessary to read. And maybe that's on me for not really looking into what this novella was, but it felt very separate from the original series and is kind of just, I don't know, fan servicey. Like if you really love these characters and just want to see them living their best lives, then you can read this novella. But for me, it just felt like a little bit of a waste of time. The mystery in this book is not really a mystery. It's very obvious what's going on from the very start. And again, just didn't do anything for me. So I do kind of regret reading this one, and nothing about the quality of it would make me not recommend it, but I very much would say it's not necessary to read. If you enjoy this series and you want to keep up with the full-length novels, I don't think you're missing anything by not reading this novella to go in between. All right, number 5 on this list is another book that I knew wasn't for me, and yet I picked it up anyway. It's Shark Heart by Emily Haybeck. This is a contemporary magical realism type book about this man who learns that he's turning into a great white shark. And this is set within a world where this is not that unusual. It is a rare condition, but it's a known condition where people turn into animals. And I guess it's supposed to be sort of a metaphor or sort of akin to receiving a terminal illness diagnosis and what that experience is like for the person going through it as well as their loved ones. The premise to me is just, I don't know, it's too strange for me to get on board with, and I understand that it's an emotional topic, and I'm glad for everyone that did love this book and that it resonated with. It just didn't hit me emotionally, didn't work for me because of the overall strange premise. So unfortunately, I was again right about this one, and I did not enjoy it. Number 4 on this book is The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. Casey McQuiston has written a few books that I've generally enjoyed. I think I've given them 3 and 4 stars in the past. This is a queer romance book about 2 characters who are exes that have broken up, and yet they end up on the same European like food and wine tour that they had booked back when they were still together. And it's about them mending their broken relationship and rekindling their romance. But they do it through this sort of contest where they see who can hook up with the most people while on this European tour. And it just didn't work for me. That definitely does not feel romantic to me. And I mean, to each their own. I'm absolutely not here to police what other couples do with their time. But again, it did not work romantically for me. I did not see what this couple saw in each other and what they wanted in each other. I do think there's a chance this could work better for people who are passionate about food and drinks, because again, they're on this food and wine tour, and it does talk a lot about the food that they're eating, the drinks that they're having, and how meaningful they are to the characters. So if that's something you connect to, then absolutely could be something you enjoy more than I did in this book. I just found really nothing to connect to and to enjoy about it. It just made me pretty annoyed with the characters themselves and what they were putting each other through. So one of my least favorites of the year. All right, in the number 3 position, we've got Bunny by Mona Awad. What an infamous book. So many people have read this book, and everybody has a very strong opinion about this book. Some people absolutely love it. It's one of their favorite books of all time, and I love that for them. But some people, like me, do not understand the hype and have strong feelings in the other direction. I will say I don't hate this book with a burning passion or anything. I did give it 2 stars. So again, I see the merit. It just did not work at all for me. If you don't know what this book is, it's a horror book, and it's about this girl who is in college, and she's a writing major. And while she's at college, she gets to know this other group of girls who calls themselves the Bunnies and call each other Bunny. And they're into some weird stuff. They end up inviting the main character to one of their little hangouts, and she gets introduced to what they do in their free time, and it's weird. And like what the book says they're doing is not really what they're actually doing. And so this book also is just a big like mind F situation of like trying to understand what is the author saying here and implying and giving a metaphor for that's different from what's actually on the page. And that's definitely part of what didn't work for me. I just didn't get it. And I'm okay with reading books that I then have to go read more about to understand some hidden messages and stuff. But even after doing that and understanding what other people are seeing in this book, it just never really clicked with me. It doesn't work for me. This is outside of my realm when it comes to talking about literature in general and like creativity, creative processes, things like that, which I think this book is trying to have commentary on. I don't know anything about being an author or really doing anything creative at all, so I don't connect to commentary on that topic anyway, but especially when you do it in such an abstract way, it just completely lost me. So unfortunately, I am on the more negative end of this book. Again, I'm glad that it has found its audience. It just definitely is not me. At least I know what people are talking about when they talk about this book now. I'm in the know about something so polarizing and popular, but very much not for me. All right, my number 2 book on this list is definitely my biggest disappointment of the whole year. It's Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. This is the author who wrote Dead Silence, which is kind of a sci-fi horror book set in space that I ended up really enjoying. And I was so excited for her follow-up book, Ghost Station. And I was fully expecting this to be honestly one of my favorite books of the whole year. It is another sci-fi thriller horror book. But everything that I enjoyed so much about the first book was just completely gone in this follow-up. In this book, we're following a female main character who is a psychologist who has just been added to this space mission and has basically been hired to talk to all of the other members on this mission and look out for signs for this psychological disease and otherwise just help the crew survive their mission. And this book to me was just completely lacking the very cool setting and atmosphere that the first book had. And I keep saying first book and second book, they're not in a series, they're not connected at all, but because they have somewhat similar setups, I was expecting a lot of the things from the first book that I loved to carry into the second book. Again, atmosphere was not there. It was very hard to visualize anything that was happening in this book. The main character of this book was extremely unlikable, which was unfortunate, and a lot of her decisions she made were questionable. And then interestingly, on the other hand, one of the very cool elements from the first book that's kind of a spoiler, but I'll say like the paranormal elements and some of the twists that came out of the first book or in the second half of the first book were reused in this book in a way that I thought made it really strange to read, because it was basically spoiling itself because it reused some of those elements and reveals in this book. So anyone who had read that first book, I think already had the idea of what was going on in this book. And that was a weird choice to me. I feel like there are a lot of other creative things you could do with the paranormal elements if you're looking to include something like that to make the horror part of it stronger, but she didn't. She just reused some of the same things that made me confused and made it feel very anticlimactic and like I had already read some of the parts of this book before. So it was just hugely disappointing. I would highly recommend this author's previous book to this one. I don't think this one is worth reading, and sadly it was the most disappointing to me because I had such high hopes going into it. I will keep an eye out for what this author puts out in the future, and I would read another book by her if the premise sounds interesting. I just really would hope that it would bring back the really strong atmosphere, sense of place, but get some new ideas in here when it comes to the characterization and what is going on in their situation. All right, and then my number 1 worst book that I read this year really does fit the criteria of being the worst to me. So it wasn't just a disappointing book, but this is the only book that I gave 1 star this year, which to me means that I would not recommend it to anyone, and it's The Guest by B.A. Paris. I, like many other people, have really enjoyed some of B.A. Paris's other books. Behind Closed Doors is one of her most popular and one that I loved, gave 5 stars. This was her new release for 2024, and it's a domestic thriller, which admittedly I don't always love. I'm pretty hard on domestic thrillers. I don't find married couple drama to be that interesting, or like suburban drama, which I typically describe as like everyone is cheating on everyone, everyone has secrets. It feels unbelievable to me and just not that interesting. So this book, being a domestic thriller, was already at a little bit of a disadvantage, but this was just everything that I just said. Everything that I hate about domestic thrillers is all that this book was. And like all of these characters were just doing stupid things for no reason, lying to each other for no reason, doing nothing productive to like actually work through their issues or try to make things better for themselves or the people around them. And to me, that's not how humans behave. I mean, of course there are exceptions. There are individuals who really live for the drama, but as a general statement, I don't think that's how the average person lives. And I definitely don't think that's how every person behaves. So I was just constantly in this book like, what are you guys doing? None of this makes sense. It's not entertaining. It's not interesting. It's not surprising because it was just repetitive over and over again, the same thing. And by the end of this book, any twists or reveals that came, again, were unsurprising because everybody was already lying to everybody else. I also wrote down in my review that the way that the big reveal came out was through a long villainous monologue at the end, which is not something I usually have a problem with. I don't mind that type of kind of confession, but I know a lot of people do. So that's yet another reason why I would call this the worst book I read this year and would not recommend it, because I know so many people strongly dislike that type of villainous confession at the end. So unfortunately, this book for me had no redeeming qualities, nothing entertaining about it, nothing original or interesting that I think would benefit other readers. I really think that if you're looking for a good domestic thriller, I could recommend you better choices. Fingers crossed B.A. Paris can get back on track and release something better in the future, but this just reinstilled in me kind of a distaste for domestic thrillers, and it will take something pretty special for me to continue giving these a try into the future. So that is it. All of the negativity is out of the way. Please let me know if you have also read any of the books that I talked about in this video, and if you agree with me or if you disagree and you actually enjoyed any of these books. Again, I do hope and expect that to be the case, so I would love to hear about it. Otherwise, let me know what your worst book or worst books that you read this year were. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else, so thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.